Hi there, Coach Sage Cannonday of SageRunning.com here with another training talk on time spent running versus the metric of actually tracking your mileage. And again, thanks for bringing this up in other comments. I've briefly touched on this in previous training talks. At the end of this video, I'll link to our extensive library list of training talk topics that we've covered in all sorts of distance running, from 5K on to the half marathon, marathon, and ultra marathon trail racing. So you could look through all the playlists as well as subscribe for new videos, because we're always coming out with new tips and training videos for you to get more enjoyment out of the sport of distance running. But this topic was voted up in the comments, and yeah, feel free to comment and give us feedback, as well as check out our coaching website, sagerunning.com, at the end of this video. Link to that as well in the description below also. But it's a good question, and basically, you know, as one of my tips was to keep a training log and to keep track of not only how far you ran, what distance in miles or kilometers, and then add it up for the week, but also look at duration, look at time, because then that also tells you relative pace and intensity. And, you know, you throw out gizmos like heart rate monitors and other data metrics, and you have all sorts of numbers to crunch. But I think the big ones are definitely miles covered per week or kilometers covered per week. And it varies depending on what your focus race is. For a lot of people that run on the roads or even run on the track, I assume most of you probably do shorter 5Ks, 10Ks, half marathons, and marathons on a road. Then you're talking about usually training more by the metric of actual distance, actual work output for a certain distance. Maybe there's not a lot of hills. Now, when you talk about trail racing, you talk about ultra marathon racing, usually you're running up and down a lot of hills, or you're running in really adverse weather conditions, up and down mountains and things like that. Then the time metric starts to become more important, as well as another metric, which is vertical climbing per week in feet or meters, however you want to describe it. So I guess to answer the question, my base answer is that you should keep track in your training log how you felt for the day. A quick sentence on how you felt, what shoes you wore maybe, what the weather was, and nutrition plans, what you ate before and after, things like that. But also, the distance you ran and the time you ran for. And, I don't add up my time that I ran every week. Strava does it, strava.com, training website, training log calendar, does it for me automatically. But, I know if I put in a big training week, it's going to take a longer time usually. And if it was a training week up in the mountains, doing a 20-mile long run up in the mountains might take me 4 or 5 hours at altitude, going up and down really steep hills. Whereas if I do a 20-mile training run out on the roads, it might only take 2 hours. So there's a big discrepancy there. But the work output, you need to take that into account. And I think the most important thing is to focus on this premise where, if you're doing a road marathon, whether you're a 4-hour or 3-hour road marathon runner, or you're a low 220 elite marathon runner, if we see how the marathon breaks down, a lot of people, regardless of speed and finishing time, they tend to hit the wall around mile 18 to mile 20. And that's just a known fact. That's when your body starts to run out of its glycogen supplies. And usually, if you're running really hard, you're going to bonk pretty hard in the marathon around that time. Ideally, you want to scrape up against the wall, and you're taking in carbohydrates on the run and drinking on the run so you don't get dehydrated. But most people tend to really suffer in that last 10 kilometers of a marathon. And again, the elites are hitting the 20-mile mark or the 32-kilometer mark at an hour 40, an hour 45, whereas most of you guys maybe, even running a fast Boston qualifying time, you're hitting that mark in 2 hours and 40 minutes, or maybe even over 3 hours. So you've been running for 3 hours before you hit the wall. These elite guys run for an hour, 45 minutes. They also hit the wall though, because it's a work output. It's you moved your body weight a certain horizontal distance, over a certain time, but you had to move your body 20 miles. And that's why the wall is pretty consistent for all people. Now, again, it depends on how fast you went out too and how well you trained for it. But generally, that's when people hit the wall. And it's a pretty constant variable. So if we think about that, it's not so much about the time spent running to get to that point of hitting the wall. It's about the actual distance. Now, in the trail ultras, like I mentioned, usually you have to throw in elevation change and going on technical trails that really slow you down. So then you're talking about working pretty hard for hours on end, beating up the body in a different way and having to kind of fuel in a different way. And so it makes sense that in your training, if you're training for a trail race or an ultramarathon training race, that you would track duration, that you might do some long runs based on duration. And, for road marathon runners, the general rule of thumb is we like to usually cut people's long road runs off at 3 hours or 4 hours. They would never run, any longer than you would really during a marathon. So for a lot of people, maybe that's 22 miles on a flat road. At a more relaxed pace, and then that duration of them running a 22-mile long run is going to be hopefully their finishing time on race day when they're tapered and all amped up, ready to race for 26.2 miles. So, there's no real direct question for that. You can keep track of all the numbers you want, but if I was a road runner and I was doing 5K to a marathon on the road, I would make sure I got in my kilometers and miles per week because, it's a fraction of your weekly mileage that you do the long run in. And it's a matter of running a set distance on a pretty flat surface, usually a relatively flat road for a marathon, 42 kilometers, 26.2 miles. And so that is the metric that you really need to go off of. And, if it's cold and snowy out and it snows a foot and you're slogging around and you run a really slow pace, a long run might take a lot longer, and your heart and lungs don't know the difference. If your heart rate's at a certain beats per minute for 2 hours or 3 hours, you got in a good amount of training, but the legs will know the difference. And that's really the important part is the legs need to sustain that workload, that pounding of actually covering 20 miles in your long run. And again, this is relative to what mileage per week you're running, but that's really the key, I think. And I keep track of all those metrics. And as an ultra runner, you definitely, keep track of the climbing as well as the duration. But some workouts I will go more by time. Some workouts I will go more by distance. One final example, I guess, would be an interval workout, a fartlek speed play type of workout I do a lot would be 8 by 3 minutes hard followed by 2 minutes easy. Now I could do this timing myself, running a 3-minute surge pretty hard, high intensity, and then a 2-minute recovery, then repeating that 8 times. It's very similar to a workout of going to a track and doing 8 by 1 kilometer repeats. Because for me, running hard, I could usually run a kilometer very close to 3 minutes flat on the track. Now, the mindset is different because when you're out on a fartlek, it's a little more relaxed. You don't have to hit certain splits. I know I don't have to cover a kilometer in that 3 minutes. Whereas on the track, I am covering a kilometer. And if it's 3 minutes or 3:05, I'm going to know. So there's more pressure there. But it comes down to, do I need to really hit a specific velocity or pace and keep track of it? Or do I need to just hit a certain perceived effort or a certain fraction of my heart rate and get in a solid effort? And usually it's kind of a mixture of both, but you could take the pressure off with a fartlek workout running for time. The same thing with long runs for ultra runners. Usually some of our athletes will say, hey, just run for 4 hours, just run for 5 hours, put in a huge, big weekend long run out on the trails, out in the mountains. Doesn't matter if you're power hiking, a lot of it, we know you're going to have to stop and eat and go to the bathroom probably. So we do that more by time, but it is a matter sometimes of also setting out, hey, you should probably try to cover 15 miles and 2,000 feet of vertical in this run as well. So you look at it as a work output, you look at it as a training stress, and you keep track of time because you need to budget your time for the week. Your time's precious. That's something that you need to budget in, and you could definitely get in higher intensity workouts in a shorter amount of time and get some pretty good bang for your buck. But volume is going to be a limiting factor. Miles per week is going to be a limiting factor if you really want to reach your potential in performance in distance running, especially half marathon, marathon, ultra marathon distances. Like we said, usually just getting in more easy miles, getting in more volume is really going to help you in the long term for long-term sustained improvement and building stamina and strength. So you could carry out your speed longer for these ultra distance or long distance running events. So again, that's my spiel on the time versus mileage. Thanks so much for subscribing on here. Thanks so much for liking this video. If you like these types of videos, feel free to comment below with future Training Talk topics, as well as vote thumbs up for comments that you like and more topics that you like to see on here. Again, don't forget to subscribe for new videos, as well as check out our website, sagerunning.com, and our playlist of Training Talk libraries. I've been doing these types of videos for years, so really appreciate the support, and stay tuned for more VO2 Max Productions.